Okay, I'm Greg Galbo, professor of political economy at York University, but I'm at U of T today, and occasionally we're asked to come down to the University of Toronto, usually by not U of T faculty, but other groups to speak or host things here. Tonight's discussion is entitled Picking Up the Pieces, Where We Go From Here After the Referendum Defeat. The first thing I must do is apologize for those who wanted to see Greg Wilpert and hear him discuss his very good new book on changing Venezuela by taking power, which has just come out. He had problems getting visas for his family, so he wasn't able to appear, but we're very lucky that we have four of the people five people on the podium tonight who have been probably the most active and knowledgeable people in Toronto on the political developments in Venezuela over the last 7 or 8 years, and they will discuss and elaborate and debate what the referenda defeat means and where the prospects of development are heading in Venezuela. Tonight's meeting is hosted by a number of groups. Venezuela We Are With You Coalition, Hands Off Venezuela, the Louis Riel Bolivarian Circle, and the University of Toronto NDP. And I would like to ask Luis Garantas to say a few words.
So actually, some of you might find it curious that the U of T NDP, a Labour Party, but a Social Democratic Party nonetheless, would be hosting a discussion about revolutionary Venezuela. And I'm of the philosophy that the NDP needs to provide a space for this sort of discussion and this sort of debate. It's the party of the working class, and I know that there are probably people in the room who disagree with that, but I'm of that opinion that it is the party of the working class, and it is the party where the masses will turn to when they want to rise up and take what's rightfully ours. And I think that the turnout in the room speaks to the importance of not only the U of T NDP, of collaborating with other groups, but other groups collaborating. It's a two-way street where we can share relationships and we can share understandings and political discussions. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of an anecdote. About a month and a half ago, there was the Ontario New Democratic Youth Conference, and one of the speakers was Sherry DeNovo, and she was talking about the need for the Ontario NDP after its defeat to renew itself, to take a new approach, because obviously with what they've been doing lately hasn't been working. And so she kind of spoke to looking across the Atlantic, looking to the social democratic parties, that Canada has too much of a tradition of looking south, and by that obviously referring to the United States. So I got up and I raised my hand and I said, you know what, I appreciate where you're coming from, but I actually think we should look south, but further south, to examples like Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Cuba, all examples of revolutionary states where the working class has begun to really take a step forward, Venezuela and Cuba being the most obvious examples of such. But these are the kinds of directions that we activists here in Canada should be taking cues from what's happening in Venezuela. I'll leave the discussion of the actual referendum to the panel. But I don't think we should necessarily be down on ourselves because of one single defeat. There is actually very much to speak of about the progress of Venezuela. I've fortunately been able to visit there once or twice and see what I think is the actual most important part about Venezuela. That is the revolutionary awakening of the masses of Venezuela. And that's not something that you can easily wipe away. That's not something that a referendum defeat eliminates. So I think that is what we should draw most inspiration from. And I just want to conclude by saying that I was able to travel to Mexico in September. And you would think Mexico, Felipe Calderón, pretty much the Mexican equivalent of Bush and Harper, president of Mexico, and leading a right-wing program that this is a country that's a long way away from anywhere that other countries in Latin America are going, well, could be further from the truth. One of the most overwhelming things about my experiences in Mexico was that there's already these beginnings of movements of awakenings in the Mexican masses, moving towards the fight against these decades of neoliberal, harsh capitalist measures imposed by the oligarchy of Mexico, and are now really starting to resist. We have the example of Oaxaca, which some people might be familiar with, the anti-fraud movement, which was the largest mobilization of Mexican people in its history, bigger than the Mexican Revolution. Interestingly enough, it was they had a mega million march of 3 million, and then one a little bit later of estimates say 8 million Plantons. It's overwhelming that there could be very exciting things happen, and this does not happen in isolation. This is happening largely because of all the other movements that are happening in Latin America. This is a continental movement. And we would hope, and I think I'm very inspired by the size of the crowd, that it becomes a hemispheric movement. Let's bring it up here to Canada and the United States. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Luis, and thank you for helping arrange the room tonight. I'd also like to welcome the Consul General and some of the staff from the Venezuela Embassy, Marina Cura de Peña. Welcome. I'm not going to say anything about the referendum. We have 4 or 5 speakers here who will kind of introduce and get us going, and we'll cover some of the specific details. So I'm not going to say anything, which is unusual. And I'm going to turn it over to some of the speakers to introduce us to some of the results from the referendum and some of the issues, and some of the current debate about political developments in the near future over the coming period in Venezuela. We're going to start with Susan Weiss and John Riddell speaking about some of the recent experiences. They're just back from a trip to Caracas and around Venezuela. John and Suzanne are very active in the Venezuela We Are With You coalition and have been very active also in the Kaya and the anti-Israeli apartheid movement, and of course have been active in the left for many years. John and Suzanne.
So my name is Suzanne Weiss, and my partner is John Riddell, and we stayed in Venezuela for 2 weeks as part of a tour organized by the Australia-Venezuela Solidarity Network and led by Federico Fuentes, a colleague of Michael Leibowitz in Caracas Research Institute. And there'll be another tour in May, and I highly recommend it, and if you're interested, please get in touch with me after the meeting. We arrived in the middle of a national debate on the government's proposed constitutional reform. And we went to 2 massive demonstrations of the revolutionary forces. One that had more than 60,000 students, and the other that had more than 750,000 people, mostly from Caracas. In a sea of red clothing and banners, our Canadian banner stood out, and people ran up to congratulate us, and we talked to hundreds and perhaps thousands of people. Please have a look at our banner in front. It says Canadians for the Revolution. We were startled to find that most people could refer specifically and often cite by number the exact referendum articles they thought were most significant. These demonstrations were different than our demonstrations in Canada, where we show our support for some cause or other. These people had a lot of experience and struggle, which they won over and over again. They were celebrating, they were confident, They felt as part of the process of what's going on in Venezuela. People said that their lives are improving, that these improvements are a result of what they themselves are doing in their own communities. We visited a mountain farming community of 200 people called Alto do Usla, reached through the world's worst road. At one point, it splashes through a river 10 centimeters deep. Residents are organized in communal council, and they believe human needs come before the roads. So their first action was to build a community center, which serves also right now as a school. Now they are building a separate structure for their school. They meet every week, sometimes twice a week, and with 40 to 100 people in attendance. They have no executive. All decisions are taken by the assembly. There are tens of thousands of these new neighborhood councils in Venezuela. One of the neighborhood projects that we visited in Carabobo was a center for street children who used to work as rag pickers in a toxic rubbish dump nearby, run by criminal gangs. 98% of these kids no longer rummage through the dumps and now are in schools. Their center features a samba-like orchestra and a karate school, both extremely high quality. The karate team, in which the girls excel, has competed in national and international championships. The kids have had a rough life so far, but they are affectionate and supportive of each other and hugging and cheering and encouraging. One day we ate lunch in a kitchen of a mountainside home in a working class settlement of Caracas. A typical Venezuelan meal of chicken, beans, rice, and plantains. The kitchen was well equipped, obviously able to feed 10 times our number, and we asked why. Every weekday, we learned, the kitchen feeds 150 of the most vulnerable local residents, the sick, the old, single pregnant women, the poor. The space is donated by a local family. Neighbors do the cooking. Equipment and food comes from the government. There are 3,000 of these new kitchens in Venezuela, serving meals to 500,000 people a day. Life is improving for working people with a focus on the needs of the most vulnerable. The mayor of Carabobo municipality said that 7 years ago he organized a survey of his residents asking what was their most urgent need. Health and education led the list by a wide margin, and that's been the focus of their efforts. Then they had 9 health centers. Now they have 74. They recently did a survey again. No one mentioned health as an area of need. Only 1 or 2 mentioned education. The mayor, Ahines, said of a Canadian solidarity, because we talked about what we're trying to do here in Canada. And he talked and he said, we're infinitely grateful to your solidarity because we have a monster, imperialism, to fight, and only you can break the silence. That's why you are brothers and sisters to us. We saw people pulling out of their poverty and beginning to address broader social problems with the assistance of their government. And they are reinventing their lives. The people we met were high-spirited and full of hope. But I wondered about the uphill battle they have to win their dreams. They have many obstacles, the greatest one being imperialism. When they say patria o muerte, venceremos, they have fire in their voices. And I'll say it, venceremos.
I now have 5 minutes to explain the constitutional referendum. The goal of the constitutional reform was to open the road for an advance to socialism. But the way the question was posed was actually tilted against the revolution. To vote yes, you had to support a wide spectrum of proposals presented in dozens of pages of legalistic text. To vote no or abstain, you had only to object to one of them, or be doubtful about one of them. And the capitalist media supplied lots of grounds for doubt, such as that Chavez was going to take your kids away, that kind of stuff. Also, the voting was shaped by the broader relationship of forces. Capitalism still rules in Venezuela, and all the capitalists' networks of influence and patronage came into play. In that context, more than 4 million voters, 49% of the voters, understood the reform thoroughly and backed it enthusiastically. But when we arrived, there were many who told us that the reform was in trouble. Support was far less than the Bolivarian votes in the previous elections, they said. And in the end, another 3 million who had previously voted for Chavez abstained. We did not see a concerted campaign for the yes. We did not see a clear presentation of why the reform was necessary. I saw no sign that the working class neighborhoods were being canvassed as they had when the United Socialist Party was launched earlier this year. Canvassed to explain the proposal and get out the vote. Only in the final few days after Chavez had returned to Venezuela did the momentum begin to build. One wonders why. Did perhaps some Bolivarian leaders drag their feet? I don't know. Certainly the leadership and ranks were not thinking, discussing, and acting together in a unified way. The Socialist Party intended to make this possible. Its base committees were organized, but it was not yet in working order. Some have said that the Bolivarian masses are discouraged by inflation and shortages, or that they're fed up with Chavez's moderation. In hundreds of discussions, we saw no sign of this. Radical critics of Chavez have been much discussed in the left press internationally. We saw no trace of them or their ideas. The trade unions were not visible in the national campaign. That said, the Bolivarian movement's focus remains national sovereignty against imperialism, with all that implies. But this movement is sustained only by the millions of working people who have fought for and won significant gains in this revolution. If the revolution conceivably were to call a halt and demobilize its ranks, it would be overwhelmed by a powerful foreign enemy, determined to drown it if necessary in blood. That is why Hugo Chavez, accepting the voting defeat, said that the process must continue to advance, citing the need to quickly enact Social Security for housewives and the self-employed, one of the most important and strongly supported measures in the reform. And in this struggle, in this advancing struggle, as Mayor Argenis Loreto told us, we in the Solidarity movement abroad are their first line of defense. Thank you.
Children being taken away, of course, has some validity if people remember from 1961 in Cuba, where the CIA and the Cuban counter-revolutionaries laid out a similar line, and literally hundreds up to thousands of children were taken away And it took many years, many years, and sometimes forever, that families were split up around this. This was an alliance between essentially the counter-revolutionary, the CIA, and the Catholic Church. And this was also more or less what was the rumor circulation that was occurring in Venezuela. I turn to Maria Paez-Victor, who is active in the Muriel Bolivarian Circle and also works with the IRIS Project at York University, which has a number of linkages projects with educational and other kinds of work in Venezuela. Maria, as we all know, has been one of the most important commentators in Canada, and in particular Toronto, over the last several years on developments in Venezuela, and we're lucky to have her give her thoughts and assessments of the outcome of the referendum.
Thank you all for coming on this sort of drizzly, cold night. Well, I want to start with the positive points. The first positive point is that half of the population of the voters of Venezuela actually voted for a socialist option. This is amazing in Venezuela, where we have had years and years and years of indoctrination on individualism, consumerism, everything that entails, you know, a capitalist system, where just the mention of socialism or communism was something, you know, to be dreaded. And you would get that through the mainstream media and powers that be. So for half of the voting population to have voted for this socialist option is really quite amazing. But there was immediately two unintended consequences when where the reform actually lost. The first is that the opposition had the rug pulled out from under them. All of a sudden, they did not expect to win. They had all these plans for losing, denouncing the government, denouncing the electoral authorities. The plan was out there to calentar la calle, which means make the street warm with manifestos and demonstrations and fires and everything they'd done before. And they couldn't do those things. And then they were caught in a corner. They won. Therefore, they had to, for the very first time, recognize that the electoral authorities were all right, that it was a transparent process. They could not say a word against the electoral process itself, nor the authorities. And, of course, what kind of a dictator is this who loses by 300,000 votes? I mean, it was less than 1% between the two of them. So now they could not go screaming through the world saying that Chavez is a dictator and that this isn't democracy. Well, of course, you know what has happened. Now many writers say there is democracy in Venezuela, but that's just because Chavez lost. So you have to have Chavez losing for them to accept the institutional process of democracy there. So Chavez has demonstrated to the world that he is a Democrat. There was no shilly-shally. As soon as about 89% of the votes were in and about 12, near 1 o'clock in the morning, he accepted this immediately, as he said he would throughout the campaign. He said, I would accept whatever the votes decide. The opposition never once said that, never once. And the other thing that they're in the corner is that all of a sudden, the opposition is the great defender of the 1999 Constitution, which they had always denied. When they overthrew Chavez, the first thing they did was they suspended the Constitution and everything in it. So they're in a corner. Right now, at this point, they don't know what to do. So it was nevertheless a defeat. And it was, I would say, that the empire won this round. So let's see. Abstention. It was 44% of the abstention. We don't know exactly what the people who didn't vote want, because an abstention is a no vote. But it is safe to say that about 3,239,000 votes that should have, these are people that should have voted for Chavez, did not vote. They didn't give their vote to the opposition, but they stayed at home. So the opposition gained less than about 500,000 votes. I think it's about 300,000 votes that they got. Now, why didn't they vote? Well, there was a lot of assumption that they would win, so there was a lot of triumphalism going on. It is true. It is true that people misunderstood the reform, and it is absolutely true, as John was saying, that it was terrible communication by the government about these complicated reforms. It was an omnibus bill, which by nature they are difficult. And it seemed that it was rushed and premature to bring this forward for the reason that the party, the PSUV, had only recently been created. So it was a new party, and it really wasn't prepared to carry over a tremendous communication campaign, which it should have been. The president presented to the assembly 33 very well-linked and organized reforms to the Constitution. But the assembly, in its wisdom, sat down and thought of, 33 more. I think it was 36 more articles. So it became even more complicated. So the reform seemed difficult and full of legal issues. But why did it fail? I think there are two separate reasons. One is the external and the other is the internal. The external is that there was a virulent international and national sophisticated campaign against the government and against the reform. These were not analyzing the actual bill. These were simply lies that were sent out in a very sophisticated type of fear ad campaign. Chavez wants to be a dictator, he wants to be there for life, he wants to perpetuate himself in power. The only issue was this re-election. It went over and over again, despite there being no limits to re-election, for example, in Canada, or in England, or in France. I mean, anywhere there's a parliamentary system, there is no limit as to how many times a person can stand for election. It's the voters that count. But this was repeated over and over again. The New York Times, the LA Times, the Washington Post, they wrote 18 editorials and articles, over 10,000 words or more, just repeating these things internationally. Nationally, the opposition, for the first time, actually came together. They came together, the financial powers, the Catholic Church, the entire network, finance network, and they obtained the services of very sophisticated people, advertising agencies, and they came up with an ad campaign that was brutal. It was brutal because it had nothing to do with the reforms. It would say things like, Chavez is going to take your children. Chavez is going to stay, forever. If you have two houses, one the government will take away from you. If you've got two of anything, the government will take that. It was private property. They're going to take what you have. And so this was a campaign of lies. It wasn't a campaign of discussion around it. Jeremy Bingham, the American journalist, he has discovered where the money was coming from, as did Eva Gollinger. And what we know is that $8 million went to this campaign. $500,000 went to, the students, these courageous, private university students that came out to protest for the first time in their life. Everything that's happened in Venezuela, the disappeared, the murdered, the jailed. They never once, the students of the private schools, came out on the street to protect their people. This time they came out because they got $500,000 from the CIA. And the Washington Office for Latin America has just said openly that they gave $48 million to the educational sort of, initiatives in Venezuela. All of that was for the opposition. This was all a campaign which is called El Golpe Suave, which is the soft coup. And it was concerted with the networks of the finance and the industrialists there, through all the months leading up to this, there has been scarcity in the country. Oh, you can't find sugar, you can't find chicken, you can't find this, because they were keeping them in the warehouses so that to bring the government down. See, Chavez isn't taking care of its people because, see, there is no food on the counters. All of this is using economic means, storing food to bring the government down. Because, forget, you know, this wasn't about the reform. This wasn't about a bill. This was about bringing down the government. And everything, 4 minutes, everything was, it wasn't a level playing field, okay? I just asked you what you would think if China gave money to the NDP to run its campaigns.
More likely with the Tories these days.
Well, this is what was happening there. And the state bureaucracy was against the reforms. The mayors and the governors, they don't want the community councils to be the ones to run the show. They don't want to be the servants of the community councils, so they did nothing. They didn't go against, but they did nothing either. So this is the internal, let's say, pseudo-revolutionaries that really did not work for it. Chavez was waylaid. Chavez was waylaid, and in my mind, there is no doubt about this. The president of Colombia asked Chavez, actually it was through one of the senators, to help in obtaining these hostages that were the found had. And so Chavez concentrated a lot of his emphasis and his energy on this. Well, this was a trick, because that was doomed from the start. They were, Uribe and Bush were never going to let Chavez be the guy who freed the hostages, especially that French woman, Betancourt. And so just, you know, a little bit before the referendum, he gets the rug pulled out of him and said, no, you're not in there anymore. And Chavez was distracted. Chavez was concentrating a lot of his emphasis on this, but that was doomed from the first, and I believe that was a very clever ploy. So in conclusion, the reform was a difficult omnibus bill. They didn't define things like socialist economy, socialist society, and this fed the opposition. The communication was, they didn't realize what they were up against, that the opposition was going to have this sophisticated publicity campaign. And the other thing is, you know, I'm not unhappy that this happened, because the government needed to win big. The 1999 Constitution was approved by more than 70% of the people. How could we have a reform that was that had a lot of abstention, and that imagine if he would have won by less than 1%. Well, we would have had the riots and the violence on the street, because that's what they wanted. So the government should have won big or not at all. So I think that this, in fact, wasn't bad, because we would have had violence in the street and destabilization immediately. They had planned for violence, and that's why there was no rejoicing. So what is to be done? Well, we have to deepen the popular participation. It's not enough to get people out on the street on demonstrations like this. The party has to incorporate those barrios. It has to incorporate the unions, which are a bit shaky right now, and they weren't part of the main party. And we must say no to the voices right now who are now talking about reconciliation. This is false. This is a trick. They are trying to take away the moderates from the Chavez movement and try to talk about Chavismo without Chavez. This is a complete false move. And instead of this sort of reconciliation, we have to deepen the revolution. We have to truly bring the community councils to be front and center of anything and everything that the government does. And, by the way, half of the things that were in that reform bill, the government and the assembly can pass already. All the things related to the workers, and the work time, the economic measures, the nationalization of the central bank, all of these economic means, the government has the means, the legal means to pass this, and I certainly hope they do. There's only two projects for Venezuela: the socialist project or the status quo that we've had, which is, of course, to be in the hands of this elite that owes so much to international capital and, I would say, the empire. So that is my take on it.
To Nicholas Lopez, who is with the Manuelita Sáenz Bolivarian Circle. Nicholas has been living in Caracas over the last several years and has been very active in and around Venezuelan solidarity work in Toronto for many years as well. Nicholas.
I'd like to thank people for coming over. I'm really glad to see a crowd, a lot of people I haven't seen before. Really like what Suzanne, John, and Maria have said so far. And I would like to invite you also to continue these discussions, to take them elsewhere, go to communities, schools, elsewhere, and continue having the discussions, not just about what the reform is about, but on other issues that could relate to the situation here in Canada. So it's a good vehicle for that. I'm glad that the referendum itself has been discussed thoroughly by the three previous speakers. So I would like to talk about socialism, which is what this reform was about. Socialism, right? Socialism in what sense? Socialism in the sense of overcoming capitalism, a long process, a very, long-term goal, I would say, and still in Venezuela where they're a little closer than here, but that's what it is, right? And there's several indicators for that. One of them is social ownership, right, which was included in this constitution, taking a step forward from the previous constitution, well, in this proposal anyway, taking a step ahead from the actual constitution in 1999. Another of it is the distribution of wealth, which there's been some improvements there. There's been limitations in the richest classes, A and B, right? And a lot of, they're being forced to pay taxes, which is a start. And then the poorest sector.
Revolutionary movement in Latin America everywhere.
And then the so-called classes, D and E, yeah, A, B, C, D. Yeah, D and E. There's been a lot of improvements. Those are the poorest people, right? They're referred to as D and E. And there's a lot of cash flow. You actually see it in the streets of Caracas. Probably you saw it. People have spending money that accounts for a lot of the inflation, and that is complemented by all of the social programs which have seriously improved the living standards, to put it that way, of the poorest people. So there is the gap between the rich and the poor is slowly but surely closing, right? And then third, there's another indicator, is the administrative and political organization of the people, which is what Greg and Maria were just mentioning, right? And what I would like to focus on. And for that, there has been, well, the reform is not the only way to socialism. The reform is just one of many ways that Venezuelans need to take in order to reach so-called Bolivarian socialism, right? Socialism needs to be endogenous. It means you need to discuss and decide on what socialism you're talking about. In Venezuela, it's been called socialism of the 21st century, right? And it's still, there is no blueprint. People are still debating on some details, but there is a general idea which Chavez has put forth as a leader. Yet it cannot happen by decree, right? So there's 5 steps that once he was elected, on a proposal of a socialist agenda, Chavez was elected on that a year ago. So early in this year, in January, he presented to Venezuelans the 5 engines towards socialism. Probably other speakers earlier this year have discussed it here in Toronto, but it's always good to keep it in mind because it's a good way to see how much we're advancing, right? The constitutional reform is one of them, so-called the second engine, right? The first one is the enabling law, which is basically the parliament giving Chavez the power to really pass laws and really set the framework to make socialism possible. So earlier this year we saw the recovery of some strategic sectors of the economy, like the electric sector, like the telecommunications sector, which had been privatized in the 90s, and mainly the oil industry, right? So there was a recovery of the Faja del Orinoco, right? The area in the Orinoco where most of the reserves are, right? And in a mixed structure with foreign oil companies from around the world they've been recovered. And it was kind of uncomfortable for some big corporations like Chevron Texaco, who actually left Venezuela because they didn't like the terms that were, that they had to work on. It doesn't matter, really. There's plenty of people who want a share of this, very rich reserves.
I think they were the only one.
Yeah, Chevron Texaco. I wonder why.
No, just
And then, that was some of the main features of the enabling law. It could happen again, as Maria said. There could be other enabling laws. However, for the second engine, which is constitutional reform, there are other ways that it could happen. This was only one try, and it was a good way to know where we're standing. It's good to know that there's 4 million people that are patria o muerte. They're ready to fight to defend this socialist project. And there is 4 million people that are against it, right? So 51 to 49%, numbers they vary. But there is a chunk of people, right? And basically, we're talking about 8 million people, right? That really we don't know. They really need to be convinced that socialism is the way for Venezuela, right? And the news is that people and community organizations and revolutionary organizations are already taking steps towards this. Article 342, which talks about amendments to the Constitution, right, or constitutional reform, says that people can request reform by collecting signatures. So they're already organizing themselves, and they will request the National Electoral Council so that approximately in February there will be a 72-hour period in which they need to collect 15% of the electorate. So we're talking about 2.5 million signatures. It's very possible. 4 million people already voted in one day for this reform, so it's very possible that in 72 hours they can get 2.5 million signatures, right? And then a few months after, so let's say in May, there will be another referendum, right? So the proposal is there, the discussions just need to happen some more, right? And the party needs to consolidate a little more so that it can be the driving force, right? And people can be convinced that the reform is the way to take. So hopefully this will happen, and they will manage to make exercise of Article 342, right? So we're really looking at these numbers. The most important numbers are those of for example, 3 million that voted for Chavez a year ago, but didn't show up this past December 2nd. And there's a lot of reasons why they may have not. It could be said that there was a punishment abstention, right? That people are dissatisfied with some of the ways that the process is being conducted. There's some elements within the bureaucracy that are very harmful to the process, and people may get disillusioned and they may get alienated by the ineffectiveness, right? There's other factors that Maria discussed. I agree on what she mentioned. So these discussions need to happen really for people to be convinced, and also the government really needs to adjust some of the problems it has, right? One of the ways is the third engine to socialism, which is called moral y luces, right? This is morals and lights, right? So it's basically outlining principles and values to a socialism, right? People need to have an idea what it means to really be socialist, so that that philosophy can materialize into action, right? Into examples. And the members of the party, the members of the bureaucracy, and people in communities need to become socialist in action, right? Not just preach socialism, but actually walk the talk, right? So it's really important that that's the ideological factor so that socialism can be reached. Then there's the fourth engine towards socialism, which is called new geometry of power, right? This is a more static structural change because it's a reconfiguration of the state structure, right? And of the roles of bureaucracy within society, right? And this can be done via enabling law, or it could be done via constitutional reform. It was included in the constitutional reform, and it was one of the main features of the proposal, right? And it goes along with the fifth engine, which is the communal power explosion. That's what it's been called, which is more flexible and which does put the social movements at the forefront of this struggle. It does put revolutionary organizations at the grassroots to really become the main driving force, along with its leader, Chavez, right? Because that if there's one thing that has guaranteed the unity of all of these wide array of social actors, it has been Chavez, the leader, right? And people have shown to be still with their leader, right? There's been questions about this what is very complicated proposal to some, but it's just a matter of time before they realize that it makes sense to them, right? And specifically in some of its parts, such as reducing the working hours in a week, reducing targeting monopolies and certain things that really benefit the everyday working man or woman, right? So both individuals and collectives need to be at the forefront, and they need to really become the driving force by consolidating this party, right? And they need to watch some of the flaws that we've already seen, and some worrying symptoms, but that it was still in time to correct them, right? Maria mentioned some of those, and really that's basically what will make the revolution possible, right? And they will also have the duty of defending, right, this revolutionary process, the gains that they've got. They're the main ones, they're the main actors who have something to lose, right? So there's both internal and external foes. Internally, they become a check to those harmful elements within the revolutionary forces, which are everything but revolutionary, basically. So they need to be at the forefront to make sure that these get, you know, the bad seeds, the rotten apples within Chavismo are removed, right? It's a difficult task, it's a very dangerous thing to do because they have some power and they have some networks, but people, if the organizations remain united and strong, it is obviously possible, right? And against external foes, which has been also described, what kind of external foes? In the defense of sovereignty, and mainly in neutralizing the ideological apparatus of the opposition of the United States, etc., right, of imperialism, in other words. So just to give you an example, it's pretty obvious to people in Canada, well, not as much, because in Canada, the problem is treated by ignoring it, right? So the less that Venezuela is discussed, the better, right? Basically. But in other parts of Latin America, where people have similar situations, there is a lot of bombardment, right? There is a lot of demonizing of Chavez, right? And there is a lot of this, you know, making the revolution seem like it's about Chavez, and it's not. It really isn't. And I really argue a lot with people who make this socialist discussion into a discussion whether Chavez did this, Chavez did that, Chavez said this, Chavez said that. Yeah, great. He has a governing style. He has a way to say things. Sometimes it's not the best. Sometimes it could be, you know, a little hard to understand. But in any case, it's not just about Chavez, you know. Chavez is a charismatic figure, and he's certainly the leader, but it's really about what happens at the grassroots, right? I just brought an example of something that circulates in 11 Latin American newspapers. So, and it's titled El Fenómeno Chavez, the Chavez phenomenon, ideology or money, right? So that's the question they pose. And basically they go through the effect that the Bolivarian Revolution has had in different places in Latin America, from, of course, an oligarchic point of view, right? So it goes through, you know, it reviews different places. This is one of the main obstacles to overcome. They've gained great amounts of distance in Venezuela, but we're still in other places that there's still a lot to contribute, right? To kind of break with that mediatic fence, right? That really has the people who are not here, who are out in the streets, really oblivious of what's going on right there and why it matters, right? So that's something to think about. And just to look ahead, kind of to sum it up, we have the signature collection and hopefully a new round of voting and a new referendum later this year. And in October there will be elections again. It will be the first test for the party, right? It will be there will be elections for mayors and governors, right? So there's a good 10, well, probably 8 months to consolidate the party and to really, you know, put some oil in its machinery so that it can achieve some success. And there certainly will be some reconfiguration of the political map, because there's been parties such as Podemos, which is a social democratic party, that has separated itself from Chavismo, right? And saltó la talanquera, as they say in Venezuela, jumped the fence, right? So it is going to be a test, certainly, and the party certainly needs to prove its capacity to lead Venezuela and to deliver effectively towards the improvement, right? As a conclusion, just want to emphasize on the need to really have ideological discussions, both in Venezuela and anywhere where there is a socialist idea put forth, right? It will not come by decree. Constitutional reform will make socialism legally possible, but it will not necessarily lead to socialism, right? So there is also a guideline via third engine, which will give principles and values, but both the party and communal power will have to become really the driving force to lead Venezuela towards socialism, and which will be basically the true materialization of the revolution with no return from it. And that's really something to learn from Bolivarian Venezuela, that only by the unity of the masses is it possible to defeat the foes of the masses, right? And to overcome adversity, right? So really the strength of the revolution, again, shall emanate from the grassroots and from its effective relation with bureaucracy, right? Which it shall aim to dominate and to overcome in the long run. Only if it agrees upon its driving ideology, which is, again, socialism of the 21st century, which we shall leave for a later discussion. And this can only be measured by the consciousness of people, and it's an everyday thing to have. Thank you very much.
Summary, I hope you'll come back and speak partly to the fourth engine around state administration and the substitution of a lot of constitutional kind of changes for taking on that position. It seems to me a big aspect of the political difficulty. I hope you'll kind of pick up and address that. The other thing I would point out is the influence on outside Venezuela, of course, is the signing the last week of the Bank of the South. One of the kind of new developments with Venezuela is the driving force, which is very important and potentially very important for all of Latin America. We now turn to Alex Grant to pick up the discussion. Alex was president of the TA Local at the University of British Columbia and has been very active in union struggles for a long time in Canada, and is now one of the driving forces behind Hands Off Venezuela. Alex?